Welcome back to Media 7. Jello Biafra, a clever man with a curious name, once advised, don't hate the media, become the media. I'll talk to three young people who did just that. But first, in take two, Sarah Daniel looks back and finds we've often been not so much down with the kids as down on them.
Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle hums, ready to race to you.
Kids today, if you believe the media, all they do is get pissed, get pregnant, get punched, get wasted,
check it out, drinking and driving,
text bully, get into fast cars and burn out. The press is negative. The future looks bad. There is no hope. They're going off the rails. The media likes to come down on the young. Politicians think they know the answer. Send them to boot camps. Raise the driving age. Raise the drinking age. They weren't like that in our day. But are they really that bad? Or is it the media that needs to go into timeout?
Sarah Daniel there. With me now are Imogen Neal of South Auckland's Manukau Courier newspaper, the Press's education reporter John Hartwell, named Best Junior Feature Writer in the last Qantas Media Awards, and Jehan Casanada, freelance journalist and former media commentator for TVNZ's Breakfast programme. Welcome to you all. Imogen, we'll start with you. You cover turf out in South Auckland that typically gets a bad press, especially where young people are concerned. Does that prey on your mind when you're working?
I think it does, but to be honest, I don't go out and seek positive stories, Russell. My biggest problem is finding enough time to do all the great stories that come my way. I think that South Auckland youth are very conscious of what the media and the general public think of them, and I think they try quite hard to get in touch with me, and they try quite hard to put their achievements and their aspirations out there. You know, they do ring me and they say, we're doing this, you know.
So they're quite media aware?
Yeah, I think they are. And perhaps that's because the Manukau Courier is in a unique position. We're a free newspaper. We're in their letterbox 3 times a week. So there's not a lot of effort involved with having to go out and buy it. And, you know, the other panel before us mentioned price as something that is important to them when they're consuming media. So perhaps that has something to do with it. But I think they definitely feel that we are a point of contact.
Do they feel a bit closer to you?
I think that intermediate and primary school age kids do, and I think that once they get to about 13 or 14 and then older, they feel quite self-conscious. And to start with, no, but as an education reporter, I definitely see it as my role to get around the schools as much as I can and to be accessible. And I do give them my card and encourage them to contact me if there's anything that they want to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is a representative group, but the only young brown people from South Auckland that I ever get to interview are young hip-hop and rap stars,
yeah,
or budding stars. And they seem very media aware. They've all got blogs, they're all on Twitter, they're all
absolutely
very polite
Bebo.
when they come in and be interviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where that comes from, but they're very good at sending press releases to us, and they're very new media savvy, definitely. Their Bebo pages and things like that are pretty swish. Yeah.
Now, John, you're not from South Auckland, you're in Christchurch. You wrote a story this week about drug use by young people in alternative education. That's right. Why did you pick that angle rather than the much more positive content that was in the report that you referenced? Because there was some real positive content in that report.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you raised it and you gave me some forewarning in your blog there, Russell, because I think it's a good example of this kind of critique that we have of the mainstream media, especially the daily metros, because the press ran 2 longer form stories on the weekend, which I believe, personally, you know, you can go back and read them yourself, but I believe personally did a good job of that, and picked out some of those examples in the report where kids were talking about what a good experience alternative education was for them and how they had achieved well through primary and intermediate and things had gone awry in secondary. So once we got to the drugs issue, you know, it's a big thing that people will read. I guess I would freely admit that, you know, it's a headline and it's something that people are worried about.
Christchurch does seem to be a city quite exercised by its youth population. For the rest of us, it seems to be the city of the boy racer, of the NOS lounge and formerly of party pills. Is that the reality there?
In Christchurch? Look, we've got our problems. I mean, I think it was interesting that the issue of boy races was raised on the previous panel. We go out of our way at the press to get a young person's voice in those stories. But the fact is that, I mean, if you ask any of those people who are running hotels, motels along the hard-hit areas, there is a real problem with boy races in that area, and we're not going to turn our back on that.
You also, the press, you didn't write it, but the press also ran the story, headed something like Youth Crime Explosion, which was based on a speech by the Chief Youth Court Justice Andrew Beecroft. There wasn't, I'm getting the feeling there wasn't really a positive angle you could have pulled out of that speech.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, again, big headline, and I looked at the figures for that paper and it sold extremely well, actually.
Which is interesting in itself, isn't it?
It is. And I think, you know, I've made the point to you, Russell, that the reporter perhaps could have found a young person's voice to go into that story, but what kind of young person has the cred to use a youth word, the cred, to challenge Judge Beecroft? I mean, as a journo, I'd love to know that there is a voice there that could have the authority to challenge Judge Beecroft, but I'm not sure there's many people in New Zealand that can challenge.
Well, the irony there is that if you go and look up the figures, the demographic where crime has really exploded in the last 10 years is over 50s. We have a senior crime wave, and you don't read stories about that, do you?
No, in fact, it's really interesting. It's great. It's the Zimmer frame generation, stabbing people with their Zimmer frames.
Jahan, you seem to be everywhere in the media. You seem very confident, and you write for print. Do you read and buy print publications?
I'm a big hypocrite because I don't buy newspapers or magazines unless I'm in them. So
You're probably
I make my money off them,
yeah.
but I know. But I think the reason that we don't have that kind of endearment to print publications is because we haven't had a Springbok tour, we haven't had a Vietnam War, we haven't had a Rainbow Warrior bombing, we haven't had an event as a generation that has drawn us in such a strong way to the mainstream media and to news coverage. And I think that's why there's a real disconnect at the moment and people are going to online media. And I think the real paradox is that you've got young people now saying we feel we're portrayed really badly in the media and we want to see better coverage of youth issues. You've also got news editors saying, well, what's the point in us bothering with that if you're not going to buy our newspapers? And I think that's really the challenge for the industry to reconcile that, because at the end of the day, we're going to be paying your superannuation, Russell, in a few years' time. You know, it's our generation, and we're also the future of the news industry. And with the challenges facing journalism at the moment, the only way to tackle those head-on is to address the needs of the younger readers and subscribers who are going to keep the industry
How do you
alive.
do that?
Well, I think one way to do that is by providing young people with an image in the mainstream media that they feel they can relate to. But at the same time, I mean, I speak at conferences and inevitably somebody gets up and says, you know, you're demonising young people. You know, why are you pigeonholing young people into these horrible stereotypes? The fact is we've got 1 in 3 kids leaving school without NCEA. Young people are responsible for 1 in 5 crimes in New Zealand and have been for the past 20 years. You know, youth volunteering has dropped by a quarter in the last decade. These are all issues, and these are happening now. And
So
I
that
think,
sounds like disengagement. Youth volunteering dropping sounds like disengagement.
absolutely.
Is that you know?
I think so, and I think it's the fact that we are now disengaged from activism. I mean, we're today's Tim Shadbolts. You know, perhaps Zach will be taking up Tim Shadbolt's mantle in the years to come. But I get really, really frustrated with the kind of constant whining about, presentation of young people in the media. Yes, there are sensational stories, and that's not acceptable. I don't think any of us would condone that. But at the same time, in New Zealand, we can be pretty complacent about social problems. And the role of us as journalists is not to give the general public a big hug. It's to challenge people and to try and affect change. And if that means you've got a news editor sitting there at 5 o'clock with one story about a kid that's wrapped their car around a power pole and a story about a kid that's won a trip to space camp, well, it's not rocket science which of those stories they're going to pick. So that's the kind of challenge.
You were both nodding at that. John, do you feel anything incumbent upon you to be the voice of youth just because you are a young reporter and a very successful one?
No, I don't think I feel anything incumbent upon me to do it, but I do like to think that in an older newsroom, sorry, that I'd like to think that I have some sort of ability to have a better understanding of things like the social media and all the rest of it. And I think, older reporters would probably happily pass those stories along to me.
Do you help them out with those stories? Help them work their computers?
No comment. Safer.
Yeah. You're on the youth round in, I'm guessing, a city which has the biggest youth population of any in the country.
Absolutely.
How does that affect the job? Does it make it a more important round?
Well, I do education, youth and children and arts, and the 4 rounds actually complement each other really well. I think education is, and kids, you know, stick a photo of the kids on the front page and people love it because it reflects, a lot of them have got kids, I guess. I think it is really important. Yeah, I think getting stories about education out there, educational opportunities, is really important. But as you're saying, I'm actually probably one of the oldest people in my newsroom, and maybe that's being in a suburban newspaper. Other than the sports reporter who's been there for a long time, I'm probably one of the oldest. So, yeah, I don't.
That's a good point, and I think it's an important point that we can actually benefit from these younger newsrooms because there is a lot of maligning going on about the way that all the news reporters are so junior these days. We do
it's
actually
a very
have
common
a young,
complaint
and it's true.
Journalists, yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm sort of after 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden becoming quite senior. But it is, it could be seen as a virtue.
I think that one of the issues that you've raised is that we need to still cover these issues, teen pregnancy and drugs, and some of the things that that we've talked about. They're issues and they need to be talked about because we need to work towards solutions. But we also need to include a youth voice or youth voices when we're talking about those things, and I think that's a lot easier said than done. You know, recently we were looking at doing a story on the referendum, and I thought it would be quite interesting to talk to some youth who had perhaps been in family situations like that, had some quite explicit views on it. You know, that takes, a lot of time and a lot of contacts and a lot of confidence on the part of the youth that they're willing to say, this is my first name, this is my last name, this is my face, and I'm willing to stand here and talk about my family. And it's probably not only a South Auckland thing, but for a lot of the cultural groups in South Auckland, that goes against everything that they have been raised to believe. So there are a number of challenges there, just to get their voice into the paper.
That sounds like social change to me. I've experienced this before in South Auckland, is that the kids are almost detached from their parents in that respect, and that they do have a different attitude.
I think even in that report that came out about alternative education, there was a girl in there that talked about traditional Samoan or Tongan family values and the things that they still abided by. So I actually think that there is still a lot of cultural respect there. There's a youth group in Otara called the Otara Youth Collective, and they've just formed and trying to get youth to put their hand up to speak publicly and to speak to councillors and sit down with the mayor, who is a very easy person to sit down and talk to, was really hard. It was a real challenge. Yes, they are very passionate. Yes, these kids will talk to you at school. They'll talk to you about issues and they've got a real feeling there, but they don't feel comfortable articulating that. So maybe there is an issue there about teaching kids from a young age how to put forward an argument and to have the confidence to put forward an argument.
And I think there's a challenge there in terms of actually getting those stories through the bureaucracy and onto the page. And I think if you've got a kid that's the first in their family to get into university, that's a fantastic story. But often, unless that helps you to make a wider point about the education system or about socioeconomic conditions, then often that story won't be heard. And I think the fact is we're not just interested in people at the bottom of the scale, we're also interested in young people who are doing extraordinary things. And there are a lot of young innovators and success stories out there. I mean, the fact that 2 schoolgirls can discover that Ribena doesn't have 4 times the vitamin C of oranges and end up with a $200,000 court case is absolutely, fantastic stuff. And those are the kinds of stories that we're into.
John, I'm interested in where you and all of you see yourself in terms of a media career, because you're right, newsrooms are getting younger and younger. In part, that's because people leave journalism. I mean, do you see yourself staying there? Do you want to be a newspaper editor?
Oh, look, I'm committed to the media. It's my passion. I love it, and hopefully there's still a job for me in 20, 30, 40 years.
I'm glad to hear someone's staying. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm definitely sticking with the media. I think it's a very effective way to reach people. I definitely see my role as a journalist as bridging a line of communication between people and knowledge or information, and I think that's really important.
Johan?
I'm quite cynical about the media. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'll be in this industry in the long term, but I think right now I think it's incredibly hopeful for us as young people in the media to be able to actually change those perceptions. And the fact that newsrooms are getting younger, as John has already alluded to, isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I think the editors and management need to be thinking more constructively about how to get younger journalists to be able to be getting those stories out. And at the end of the day, it gives you a better product.
Oh, best of luck to all of you. We do have to go now, but that is all for this discussion. Thanks to Imogen Neal, John Hartvelt and Jihan Casanada. For more background on issues we've discussed, including the Mazengard report and paedophobia in general, you can visit the Media 7 blog at tvnz.co.nz/Media 7. After the break, should the Film Commission go long in the digital age?